Okay, I think we are live. Okay, so Ryan, I didn't mention this to you in our pre-call discussion, which was very brief because I was running a little late. So I plan to run a sponsor ad right before this recording. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, by all
Uh,
means.
It's, but it's not for GemRate though.
We'll talk.
We'll
Maybe
talk.
maybe 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 we can fit you in, or we'll make the 2024 cut.
Okay. So the reason I bring that up is I had you on in August, 4 months ago. So this is Ryan from GemRate. Awesome graphics, great data on Instagram and other places, which we'll talk about. So I had you on 4 months ago, a little bit right after the national, and I was starting up this Meet the Grader series, and you kind of helped set the table for that, which I really appreciate. And so we talked. I can't remember the full amount. I think we talked over an hour, which is what I usually, which is what usually happens with me. But I turned it into a 3-part series because I decided to do these like little monologue intros. And in one of those intros, I kind of was just talking about sponsorships, and so that's why I wanted to bring that up because it's been something on my mind for a while, and I only just recently started putting out like sponsored reads, canned reads, or live reads, or whatever it is. So I just wanted to kind of let you know that that's happening before this episode starts.
No, that's great. Congrats on landing those. That's a big deal.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what people say. It's like, oh man, don't take it for granted. It actually is like a testament, or it's a big deal, and don't take it for granted because you never know when that stops and all that. And I'm just kind of like, okay, like people don't believe me when I say I don't know what I'm doing. They think, oh, he's got this whole thing planned out. I am flying by the seat of my pants. Okay, so, with regards to this recording, we have you on to talk about the year in grading, and I kind of made this little graphic. I thought it was a fun, silly idea, because 2023 Spotify Wrapped, right? It's like the year. Here's what you did. Here are the songs, and all that stuff. And I thought, let's have Ryan on if he will have me, or if he will, you will have me, or I will have you. I don't know, one of those two. And I thought, let's do a year in review, grading review. And I made a little Photoshop of, um, putting in the word grading into my Spotify, kind of like my Instagram post. And I said, give me your questions. And in the past, so much engagement, so many questions. And then this time, just absolute crickets. So I don't think it's because there's no appetite for grading. I think it's stronger than ever. I think it's just that my engagement is just lower. It might be because I took on sponsors and people are just turned off by me. It's possible. So since we don't have a lot of questions, it was great having you on. Thank you. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
yeah, you just spoke so much. No, so let's go ahead and just kind of talk about. We didn't do a lot of prep for this call. You've put on some amazing graphics with universal pop reports, and I mean, maybe I'll just have you start talking about what you've done this past month and how things are looking for you.
Yeah. So this month we for the last 2 years we've done mostly work behind the scenes on data. Not a lot of like collector facing upgrades or updates to what we've been doing. We just we published the monthly report, which obviously generates a lot of discussion, which we like to see, just because grading is so polarizing or sort of tribal. Um, but for the first time in 2 years, we finally released some new data, and then we also sort of started to preview this universal pop report, which I think we've talked about a decent amount in our initial conversation. And we're finally starting to window what that looks like and sort of bring to market the first sets, to help showcase what we think the universal pop report could look like. It's still early, so we're very open and welcome to feedback. But the new data that we released was around PWCC did an iconic 100 last year at the end of the year. And people have been asking, is there sort of a GemRate equivalent to the pricing indexes or indices that you see from some of the collection management tools or auction houses? And I've been thinking about it the last couple of years, and I thought that the PWCC Iconic 100 was a good representative list of just really significant cards in the hobby. And I wanted to showcase, the quality side of grading. So the monthly report really captures the high level macro, picture of, just who's seeing the most volume from a grading standpoint. point, or who's saying the least volume. But I've seen I read all the comments all the time, and people will comment, well, McDonald's sells a lot of hamburgers, but doesn't mean they're the best, restaurant chain. And so, one of the things I really wanted to do was give people a peek behind the quality side. And this iconic 100, we're calling it the iconic tracker, which is following the cards that are on this iconic 100. Give people a much better view of just like how are the most significant cards being graded, how often, how frequently, but who's grading them. I think that's one of the things that people are going to find most interesting is just, is there anything noteworthy happening with these, massive cards in hobby, whether that's the 86 Flair, or the 52 Mantle, or the 79 Gretzky's, things like that. So that was the new data that we released this month, and then we tied that to the Universal Pop Report, and we released 35 sets to basically showcase all cards on those sets and what it would look like, what the grading population looks like for all of the big graders that we cover, which is PSA, SGC, Beckett, and CGC.
I think it's very smart to go top down, right? Start with the most iconic, start with the ones that people have the most interest and have the most eyeballs and saturation. It makes sense. But I do have to ask you. So I'm guessing here in this analogy with fast food restaurants, PSA is the McDonald's, right?
Yeah, honestly, it just depends on who's commenting. That's the beauty of this data. I love it. Like I can hear the same, I will see 1 month people will comment it's PSA, the next month somebody will comment it's SGC, and then it's always just a discussion, and it's obviously very subjective. So yeah, PSA gets that comment a lot, but now that SGC is number 2 by the grading numbers, oftentimes, they'll get the same.
I kind of want to know who's Burger King, Wendy's, and then like who's the Arby's. I guess maybe you don't cover the Arby's of the world. They've got the meats, by the way. They're not a sponsor though.
Right. Well, I'd like to think that there's like a Shake Shack mixed in, a Five Guys, right? We've got some good stuff happening here. Maybe that's the tags of the world that people are, interested in, the arena clubs, So anyways, there's definitely like a lot of, I don't know, there's just a lot of debate. And so this quality index is going to just shed some light on, just like where are these really iconic cards going?
One of those companies might be a sponsor. So, but no, I gotta say it's, again, I said, I don't think it's a lack of appetite for grading. The year over year continues to show great growth, right? Month over month. It's just we keep grading more, right? There's no cards to run out of to grade. I mean, so long as cards are being produced by the manufacturers, so long as people are buying those cards, and so long as people want to I know a lot of people are like, well, people just grade to flip, and you're trying to sell it, but there are people who also grade just to preserve, right? I mean, that was arguably the original reason for grading. I don't know, but I'll let you kind of talk to that with the numbers like year over year and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was trying to think about ahead of this call, just sort of like what are the big picture macro trends, or sort of, how would I summarize this year? And I think like TCG is a huge part of the story, but it's led to a bit of a head fake in sort of how people are perceiving sort of the strength of grading. Like TCG is going to be up 50% or something. I don't hold me to these numbers. The year's obviously not finished, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but let's say TCG is going to be up 50%. And sports is going to be down single digits year over year across all grading companies. And that's the bulk of that is weighted towards PSA, but it's representative. That's trend holds for all the companies. And what I think is happening there is people perceive grading to be really strong, but TCG is carrying a lot of the load. And I think TCG, there's still a lot of question marks just of, where are all these slabs going? How many of these are hitting the market? Are they landing, collections instead? Is there a different dynamic happening in the TCG space than what we've seen with sports, where there was this, massive bubble created and then sort of a massive correction over the last couple of years? And so the question is like, is TCG different, or are we sort of going down that same path and it's just on a staggered timeline? So that's like one. Is TCG has been really interesting, but it's definitely carrying the load. And like if you actually just segment it down to sports is going to be down single digits, and I think it's a meaningful and noteworthy trend. And so what that means for the grading companies is interesting too, because you're seeing, I don't know exactly what the number is. Maybe I have it up here. Yeah. So like grading is going to be up, I don't know, 17, let's call it 15 to 20% year over year. on total
Mm-hmm.
volume. But
Okay.
you have to factor in pricing, and pricing is going to be down 10 to 20% year over
Mm-hmm.
year. And so, net net, a lot of these grading companies are going to be up slightly, down slightly, even though the perception is that more cards are going, coming in the door. It's definitely the collecting community, the investing communities gotten smarter over the last couple of years. And so, they're definitely more considerate of what they're sending in. And I do think there's been much more of an aggressive pricing, play or sort of movement in the market. And so net net, I think grading's sort of treading water in a lot of ways. So the story from what I published from just a pure volume standpoint looks pretty positive. But if you kind of start to dig into the details, it's in a good place relative to a lot of the other parts of the hobby,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's, you look at marketplaces or you look at just the overall sort of, I don't know, anything that's related to sort of sales. I don't know exactly what the manufacturer numbers would look like. But anyways, the perception is the hobby's been down quite a bit. And I think grading's up relative to a lot of other sort of components of the hobby, but it's also sort of like, it's not, a home run as it relates to like the momentum. I think they're doing well, relatively speaking, but they also have their own sort of challenges that they're facing.
Thank you for that. You already preempted a couple of my questions actually, but the next question I was actually going to ask was, are does your data seem to indicate that people are getting smarter with what they're submitting? Because I know there's the quantitative aspect of data and then the qualitative, and so the big thing people were submitting was like say paper-based rookies, right? I mean that's from the Ja, Zion, LaMelo, all that stuff. People were just submitting paper-based and it was flooding the market. You're able to see the type of players, and we're going to get to that later down the road too. Just Zion being in the top 10 of most graded players from PSA and all that. But I think you answered it right. People are getting smarter with what they're submitting.
People are definitely getting smarter, and I think still part of that is circumstantial because manufacturing is so delayed. These cards come out, and a lot of players sort of, they've already sort of had enough time to sort of, you can have a fair understanding of like these, the prospects if they do have potential or if they're sort of quickly going to flame out. And so I do think that's led to one, just people not being able to grade as quickly as they used to as it relates to like the prospecting standpoint and
Mm-hmm.
getting ahead of things before the season starts or as the season sort of building momentum. And that's sort of gone away because, we still have 2022 flawless that hasn't even hit the market yet, for last year's NBA rookie class and these things. So, anyways, I think it's part of it circumstantial. And then in general, I do think people are just, the grade to flip element's not as strong as it used to be. And so people recognize that. And then I think that people have definitely like shied away from base. Obviously, I think there's a lot in the market that tells us that that's something new. But I do think grading has definitely, through that lens, has pulled back quite a bit as well. So there's a few different pieces in play, or sort of things in play there. But in general, I think the hobby's gotten a lot smarter as it relates to grading.
Good. Well, good job, us. Congratulations, everyone. We've with enough time in the hobby, we've gotten a little bit smarter. Maybe we have learned something. So this is not anything. This is completely anecdotal and based on what I've talked to with friends in the hobby and just people I've transacted with. But my understanding, or that, hey, please let me know if this is a myth or not. I heard that right now, recording this mid-December, PSA 8s are the same from a comp or value standpoint as raw cards. And we're talking about ultra modern cards, right? I mean, I'm not talking about 80s and 90s cards, but PSA 8, ultra modern, basketball, football, same as raw. And then PSA 9s, they're not even 1.5 times. Like they're almost, some of them are even the same as raw. I mean, and again, we're talking about like not raw, we're not talking about like rare and golds and not of 50s. We're talking about really kind of like those maybe paper based rookies or just the refractors or the hollows. But do you have any insight as to that, like what the values
Yeah.
are with respect to PSA? Well, and I use PSA of course for the resale value. They're the king in that. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any data points to speak to, but first from my personal experience, and I can pull out some anecdotes from that. But just what I've seen, I would say it's even stronger than what you said, which is I think it's much more like PSA 9s in general are the equivalent to raw, and oftentimes less than raw as well, because people are this is such a speculative hobby that people would rather take that chance of paying for a 3x multiple of raw versus buying the actual let's just call it a PSA 9 or a mint card in general. So,
Hmm.
there's just so the population of mint cards today is sort of ridiculous, So,
Hmm.
when you have all these different parallels and you have all these different options, there you sort of have to be sort of looking at things through a pretty rare or specific lens to be interested in the PSA 9 to begin with. A lot of times,
Hmm.
and this depends. Everybody's got their own sort of like style and preferences as it relates to it. But like the number of people seeking out PSA 9s in general or a mint card is much smaller than it used to be. And so
Hmm.
relative to how many people are participating in the hobby or sort of like the proportion of the hobby. So I think that plays into it. But anyways, the short answer is I definitely think that's the case. And I think that's a bit of a problem because what happens is, one of the big knocks against my data, which is sort of just a downstream of pop reports in general, is that there's a lot of cracking that happens. And so if you get back a PSA 8, you are in this weird moral, predicament of, well, if I crack it and sell it, I can make more money. But like, should I just sell it and let people know what this PSA, this card is a whatever PSA 8,
Hmm.
SGC 8, right? Like, are
Hmm.
you for the good of the hobby just going to leave it in that case and take a hit? Or do you
Hmm.
crack it out and, sell it and maybe pick up an extra 10, 20, whatever? Or if it's a higher end card, you're definitely like talking about more at stake. And so that's the real interesting part of this hobby, which is like, where does your sort of moral compass fall? And,
Mm.
it's a shaky grounds, because we're all doing things a bit differently. And
Yeah.
so, who's to say everybody's got an opinion, but it's like, I don't know. It's just everybody's got an opinion. It's sort of the short answer there, and there's no right answer. Um, and that's a problem though, because we do see a lot of people that do crack, and like there's a whole market, I'm sure, of people that have found arbitrage and cracking PSA. There's way more PSA 6s on the market today, PSA 7s on the market for ultra modern cards
Hmm.
by order of magnitude than there were just a few years ago. You see it all the time where PSA
Hmm.
used to never give out 6s, and now all the
Yeah.
time it's for dents and centering and all these different issues. They're much more willing to sort of land on like a PSA 6. And there's a whole market, unfortunately, that people just buy those slabs, break them out, and sell them as raw again, and go through that same process. And so, and you can make money doing that, which is unfortunate. And so, it creates these downstream behaviors that are not beneficial to the hobby in a lot of ways.
You're right. Well, so when you said you had some people who knock your data, it's oh my gosh, Ryan from GemRate has haters too. We all have haters. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. You're just reporting data, and people are upset about that. People can get upset about everything nowadays. It's nuts. So it's really interesting. The ethical way to crack again. Everyone's moral compass and ethic value system are going to be all different, but one way that I recently saw that I really admired, and I have to think about whether I would do this because, and it's not because I'm not a moral ethical person, but this person really went out of their way to do it. I think a really admirable way. So I'm going to give shout out, and this was not in my notes or anything like that, but 90s kid card collector Curtis, he loves cards raw, but he actually buys like say PSA 8s and cracks them, and then he cracks and doesn't resub. He puts them in one touches, makes them look pretty, like the prettiest cards on the internet, on social media. So shout out to him for that. But then he actually sends these, the the thermal printed red and white, the labels. He sends them to Nat Turner for removal from the registry. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's a rare bird in this hobby, though. I think if
Yeah.
obviously it's not an easy system. It's not sort of a well-known system, and there's a lot of friction there. I do think, like, let's say it was a much simpler and sort of seamless system, there definitely would be more people willing to do that. Uh, but yeah, I think that's like few and far between of the people that are actually
Yeah.
collecting those and actually returning them to the company. And it really depends too, right? Because that's a pure collector there who wants those to no longer be.
Yes.
His intentions are, this is no longer in existence. Like it's literally not in the slab anymore. Let's remove it. A lot of people who are cracking them out are resubmitting them, right? And so they have no
Hmm.
intention of even going through the motions of sort of. They don't even acknowledge that card in the
Yeah.
slab, right? It's
They
different.
don't. Right. Pure collector is such a term. I've heard that elsewhere in my Instagram, and I don't know. It just seems so like Harry Potter, like muggles and half bloods. Like, who's a real pure, or pure collectors? Just, people just buy and never sell, and just kind of like, I don't know. I won't talk about it with you here because I don't want to get
No, it's
tactical
great.
steam up.
No, it's good, but it's a spectrum, and I totally agree. And it's like, I actually, I sort of get kind of wants to fired up, but it kind of rubs me the wrong way when I hear a lot of that too, because ultimately, like, I collected as a kid, and I collected on the dream of, like, in the early '90s of cards being worth something 20 years later, and like it was
Yeah.
like I was making trades, I was collecting what I liked, but I always had this intention of, like, I collect this, but I don't expect them to go to zero, and this is not
Hmm.
just like, you know, um, a binder that I is collecting dust and maybe somebody appreciates. Like, there was always this idea of, like, the to sort of accumulate value. So I think, like, to separate sort of like anyways, yes, I think it's a spectrum, and I do think that, like, value plays a big part of that,
Yeah.
whether that's in the near term or the long term. So I agree. Like, pure collector can definitely, like, be one of those, just buckets that maybe doesn't, whatever. It's maybe it's a slippery slope. I don't know. I don't know exactly how to
Right.
describe it, but it's
Yeah.
definitely, like, not as true as people want it to sound.
Right, right. And the value of the binders when we were kids, I gotta very much say, I kept telling that to my parents, my mom and dad. I'm like, listen, it's not a, I didn't call them consumables and collectibles back then, but I was just like, look, this is like, I'm spending my money on this, and this is gonna be like so nice and expensive when I grow up. And
Right.
they were like, they're immigrant parents, so they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I remember my mom would be like, why do you care so much about Michael Jordan? Like, he's not feeding you and clothing you like I am. And I'm like, I don't know, you're not cool. You're not as cool as him. Um, but no, actually, this I did want to speak about because we just talked about gem rates and all that. PSA, like I used to call them. I'm not going to do the whole Emperor's Wear no clothes because I'm not saying that's the reason I got a 10% gem rate on my recent submission, but I don't think it helped. I don't think it helped. But there was this general consensus from people, and why are they the resale king? With that, I don't think there's general consensus. But one of the things that they did really well, I think, was they didn't do the 9.5. They went from 9 to 10. I know they have like 8 point. You see, they're so rare to see 8.5 and 7.5s, especially those for like the older cards. But a lot of people were like, you got to have a 9.5 and you got to do this, and they were like, they held firm. They're like, no, we're not doing subgrades. We're not doing 9.5. We're doing what we're doing, and it's going well, so we're gonna keep doing it. So to me, it's almost like PSA was like the cool teacher. I think we talked about this in the past too. It's like they're the cool teacher who gives out all the A's, and then you got like the Beckett who's like the strict German teacher who's like nine, auf Wiedersehen, and just like really strong. And then you have like just these other graders and teachers out there. But like PSA was like all the kids wanted PSA. They're like, oh my gosh, did you guys hear about Mr. PSA? He's so cool. He is just like he's like the PE teacher, and he's like, oh yeah, you can run a lap. Just I'll give you an A. So the reason I bring that up is, I mean, how did we get here? How do you think we got here? Like PSA just dominating the grading space.
um, yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and I think we touched on it a little bit the first time. And I think a lot of it does come down to some of their history, the legacy of the brand matters. So, like, I think the premium people pay for a slab is a little bit of like a bet on, like, the longevity of the company. And so, I think part of the reason you've seen Beckett's pricing decline, or sort of that their sort of multiplier or premium decline, is that people aren't as certain they're going to be a grading company, 5, 10 years from now, or sort of not
Mm,
look and feel the same. That's for sure. And
okay.
so you've seen a pullback in sort of their premium in the market. The PSA, they have the longevity or duration, but they also have a guarantee, which is unique or sort of differentiated from a lot of players. It's
Hmm.
very well defined. There's actually policies around it. There's not, there's limitations to it, but there's some guarantees and certainty around when you buy a PSA slab, what you get, or sort of what they're assuring as a result of purchasing that slab. And so I do think that plays into it. And then the one that people like to really lean their hat on, which is still unclear, is sort of how much of a role it plays in ultra modern and modern market, but the set registry is something people really want to lean on a
Mm,
lot,
mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm.
sort of lean into. And the challenge with that is I look at the set registry numbers all the time, and it's not it's an important part of vintage. It's not a relevant part of most of
Mm,
the modern and ultra modern hobby. So obviously, I think when most of us, especially like the people who've come back into cards over the last few years and are doing content and um, creating companies, like a lot of us are focused on modern and ultra modern,
yeah.
and we talk about the premium through that lens, and that really is not supported by the set registry conversation. So
Mm,
I think that sort of gets overblown in some ways as it relates to like the more recent cards that are in the market. So I
okay.
do think there's a lot that's still to be defined, but I definitely think like part of it is the guarantee, part of it is sort of the longevity of the brand, and I do think that's why you see like XGC slowly making some, you
Mm,
know, momentum, making up some or getting some momentum there. But it's a pretty long play to close the premium. You kind of are either waiting for a company to screw up.
mm,
There's rarely like in the grading space. I often think about like how do you sort of break through, and a lot of times historically companies have had to wait for like screw ups, effectively to take advantage of it. Whether that's you know um, a company shutting down and no longer being able to sort of take on, you know, take cards in and out, or there's, a pricing hiccup or whatever it might be, it's hard to break through. And so you're playing a long game. And so I don't know that it's very well explained. And I do think it's a great question, but I do think like people like to point to the set registry. And I do think it matters, but I don't think it matters nearly as much for the ultra modern. And so I do think there's a lot that's not quite explained. And I do think it's probably this, um, perception. Liquidity is probably a big part of probably like a big piece of the
mm-hmm.
premium. So like when you think about like stocks, and people don't like to compare parts of stocks, but I do think there's some parallels for sure. Like the
Yeah.
PSA slab is very liquid, and so when you think about what gets priced into it, you can move that with very few questions asked. Any other grading company, there's questions that are brought into the equation, and so
Yeah.
there's probably some part of the PSA premium that is just a liquidity factor, right? And that's probably much larger than people realize, and maybe overblown to some degree, but it definitely exists.
Gotcha. So waiting, I really like the way you said that. It's almost like we're waiting for someone to screw up, and you get kind of gave some good examples of that. But in my head, I immediately went to because John Moran. By the time we're recording this, or I don't know when it's gonna be published, but he's supposed to be coming off his suspension for showing off his gun. So I'm picturing in my head as you're saying that, like Nat Turner showing off a gun on his Instagram live, being like, "Look at all these guns." He's in his car and his buddies. He's someone's like, "Hey man, don't do that, don't do that." So it's
Yeah,
not
I
that
mean,
big of a mistake.
no, but I mean, there's, yeah, I mean, it's really hard to break through, and so you really have to be patient and sort of like that's why I do think it's interesting again with all these different pieces that we publish and how people react to it. It's all these brands are trying that are challengers to PSA for competing
Hmm.
for this number two spot. They all have very different approaches. SGC has gone like the promotional route. Beckett's
Yeah.
really done nothing, but they're sort of like
Hmm.
actually doing fairly well, much better than people perceive them to be doing,
Okay.
which is a testament to how strong that brand is. And
Hmm.
then you have CGC, who's like very partnership oriented, right? And
Yeah.
they're all
Yeah.
sort of like planting flags,
Yeah.
some better than others or stronger than others, but like they're
Hmm.
there. And they're hoping that there's some. I'm making this up, but like they're hoping PSA has some sort of scandal or something like that, right? And it's like, or there's some sort of like massive economic or sort of whatever event that happens that just creates an opportunity for another company to step in there. But until then, they're just sort of like fighting for second place, and that's actually like a great place to be in. Like they're very profitable, or I don't know, I shouldn't say
Right.
profitable, but like these companies make money, or at least they generate decent revenue. I don't know if they actually make money, but they're meaningful. And like again, we talked about this on the first call as well, but they don't necessarily have to be winning or in first place to be a very productive company.
Hmm. I definitely want to get to the data since you are such a data guy and analytics driven, and with regards to the market share. So I know you already have it at your fingertips. I'm not trying to like buy time here, but I did want to say what you just said. I found it really refreshing that when I had on some of the smaller grading companies, I can't remember exactly who, but I think maybe it was C3 Grading, their president Eddie, who was like, I was like, you guys aren't rate. Is your goal to be number one? He's like, we're not even we're not even Formula One. We're Formula Two. We want to
Right,
get into
right, right,
Formula
right.
One. We understand that we are not competing in the same level as the top four, which is, of course, the top four is the ones that you report on, and they have the pop reports and they have, data that they share. But when it comes to market share, yeah, it's like, again, the McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, like, they're just Burger King. They're just waiting for some botulism breakout or some, more cow brain disease
Uh-huh.
in one of McDonald's is, supplier chain. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good way to put it. Like, with regards to what's going on with the kind of like the jockeying for position. They don't have to get number one right now, and not just not being number one right now is okay, because they're just kind of like holding patterns or gaining market share. So if we could talk about the market share, how does the data, like, what is the data for bear? I don't even know how I'm saying it, but like, what does this data show with regards to market share? Keeping in mind one more thing, I'm sorry, which is Tokyo. PSA opened up an office in Tokyo, Japan, about a month or two, 3 months ago, something like that.
Yep.
I presume they opened that for Pokemon cards. I know the Otani market's hot, and I know that's like really big, but I doubt that they opened it up for baseball, basketball, football. So, keeping in mind that
It's
PSA did
hilarious.
open up a big office in Tokyo, what did the numbers look like from January to December?
Yeah, I mean they opened it up or in the summer, right? And so I mean it is
Uh,
it is funny though. Ever since that's happened, it's definitely like a coincidence, but it is pretty funny. Otani's been like a top graded player, by like a landslide
mm,
since that. I mean he obviously had like another breakout sort of trajectory changing season this year, right? And so he's been thriving, but it doesn't hurt. That they opened up that office. And so it's definitely was obviously oriented towards TCG. If you actually hear about, I think Ryan Hogue has spoken to, like, they do a lot of like Japanese baseball. Like, I think it's I
mm.
don't know how you say it in the phone or what the league is called, but like they do a lot of those cards over there, relatively
Oh yeah,
speaking.
the Nippon Professional League, NPL or NBL. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Nippon
yeah,
Baseball
yeah.
League. Sure,
Yep,
yeah.
yep.
Oh my
Yeah. So
gosh,
that
that's
there's like,
interesting.
they see a decent amount of those cards coming through the door and things like that. But
Mm.
it's definitely, if you just like want to break it down into like incrementality, I think they do like 5 to 10,000 additional cards. God, I want to say per day as a result of that opening. So they went from
Mm.
basically, yeah, that's correct. It's like they went from almost doing 50K a day on like a full capacity day to doing 60K a day on a full capacity day. You throw in New Jersey into that mix as well, and they're just which is primarily TCG oriented
Mm.
too. That's why they've been in part been able to grade a lot more cards. Also, sort of one of the things that I've heard from all the grading companies is that TCG cards are easier to grade. So you can
Oh.
grade, you know, almost 2 times as many cards or TCG cards, or in half the amount of time you can grade a TCG card versus a sports card. And
Mm.
so, or you can grade twice as many over the same amount of time. And
Half the
so,
time.
yeah, so that's part of why I think one, there's been a lot of rallying around TCG, and there's a willingness to sort of go cheap on TCG pricing from a grading standpoint. There's just obviously like a lot of cards out there, but yeah, so the Japanese market has definitely opened up some meaningful capacity for PSA, for example, and you see like CGC, for example, again talking to like all these grading companies and their strategies. CGC is definitely one of the ones that's trying to go global, so we'll see like they're
Mm-hmm.
placing a bet there, right? They've got some pretty sizable backing, and they're placing a bet that global can be one of the ways that they break through. Like obviously, if you're watching PSA pretty closely, there's definitely like an opportunity there. It's different sort of stages and sort of levels of focus and sort of level of commitment, but international is a big part of the story too.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So when it comes to the market share, the piece of the pie, right? The
Oh
pie
yeah.
can grow. The pie can become go from an 8-inch pie to a 10-inch pie to a 12-inch pie. Now at this point, I'm trying to figure out what am I talking about, pizza or dessert pies. But um, so when it comes to this, the majority, I imagine, is still PSA. Like,
eighty
add up,
percent. Yeah, it was.
yeah,
It's
add
eighty
up
percent.
everyone else. Yeah, adding up everyone else, they don't even crack a quarter of the pie.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely somewhere between 75 to 80% in any given month.
Oof.
Um, and so it's massive. And then you've got, the other three, largest players all within 5 to 7 to 10% in any given month,
Okay.
depending on sort of
Okay.
what promotion they're running or sort of what partnership they have in place. Um, so but yeah, I mean PSA has the lion's share of the market.
Didn't they also, and I'm not trying to make this into an all PSA, but it's hard to not talk about, right? It's having a podcast about fast food and then not talk about McDonald's, right? Did they kind of expanded and then contracted their staff, the graders, or was that other positions? I feel like you might know
It
just
was outside of
talking to
grading. I'm
them
pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it was outside of
outside,
grading. Yeah.
outside of grading. Okay. So New Jersey, mostly Pokemon. Does that mean California is more of the sports?
I think they're the primary point from
Okay.
almost
Okay.
all, not all sports, but they get significant majority, especially like if there's a higher end card or vintage card, those are going to California.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Yeah, it should really. I've talked about this plenty in my podcast in the past, but I mean, you're telling me that Japanese cards with the Japanese quality are just far better and easier to grade than American. Like, it astounds me how we as American consumers have generally accepted that cards that you pack pull may not come out all gem. Like, it's just
Right.
we've accepted it as consumers because we keep buying it. We keep buying these damaged cards, whether the damage is from dropping, physical dropping, which you can't really help with manufacturers, but like print lines, right? And like just off-centered stuff. Like that's isn't. I mean, please let me know if I'm wrong, but centering and print lines, those are manufacturer errors. That we talked about, like aftermarket damage, right? I can't remember if it was you or someone else, but there's production damage and there's aftermarket damage, and we've come to a general consensus or okay that hey, send it. We'll keep ripping. You keep making print line damage and off-centered cards. We'll keep buying them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to be honest. I do wish there was some more control, self-control in this hobby in a lot of ways, where we sort of were willing to put up more of a stand and sort of unite against things that we don't like. And the
Yeah.
reality is there's just so much momentum or inertia that it's just really hard to sort of enforce change at the highest levels here. And so I do think like manufacturers have definitely gotten away with a lot. I can't remember where I've talked about this, but if you looked at some of the stuff that was happening at the peak of the boom, Panini had one person in support with replacements. They were doing, they went from like, I can't remember, I've heard the number quoted from like 100 million to a billion in sort of like revenue. I don't know if that's right, but that's probably representative of like what happened. Yet their support went from like 1 to 2 people, right, in that same period. And like they were getting worse with printing. They were just piling up these cards in the background, and it's like nothing's, and they were increasing prices massively over that same time period, right? So the burden was growing on consumers to get value out of these packs, to get cards that were in good conditions that could be graded. Yet Panini was doing like nothing. I'm using Panini. You can sort of maybe translate that to other company manufacturers as well. But like there was definitely like an underweighting of the other side of the hobby, which is like we're gonna produce all this product, we're gonna raise prices, grading costs are going to go up, but we're going to lessen quality at the same time, and we're not going to do anything to help you if you do get a crappy card out of the pack. So there was like a desperation, and I've called grading like the bailout for the last couple of years, because it really truly is like people pay these sort of ridiculous prices for wax, thinking that they were going to get good quality cards out of the packs. They did not. They still sort of were desperate to grade cards because they needed to recoup something, and the hobby was sort of okay with a lot of this, and a lot of the companies that were supplying the hobby benefited, but the actual collectors and consumers in the hobby definitely took a big hit. We're paying these high prices, we're getting cards back that are, we're sending cards out, we're getting cards out of packs that are worse quality, we're sending those in for grading with shit which are getting, reasonably so worse grades probably at the same time. And so they were sucking a lot of money out of the hobby by all these companies not really being accountable for quality in a big, this really starts at the top a lot of here.
Right.
So anyways, that's a big problem, and it's definitely something that is very frustrating, and we've not done a good job of sort of, I do think like with fanatics coming in, they put more focus on quality. Mm-hmm. And honestly, look, at the end of the day, this is where, when you first said this is where my mind went, which is like, it's definitely going to be a blessing for this era of cards, because if everything did come out in good quality, nothing would be differentiated. And, it'd be hard to sort of, really find anything that's truly rare in this era, other than like very, very, very low serial numbered cards. And so it is back to the point you made earlier. Like, there's a reason people are paying less for nines, right, than they are for a
Uh-huh.
raw card, because a
Yeah.
10 matters that much more than a nine in this era of the hobby. And a lot of cards, more cards are getting a nine than are getting a 10 these days. And so
Mm.
straight out of the pack. And so, that's sort of what we've allowed for. And that's definitely going to be like the saving grace 20 years from now. But in the moment, a lot of money is getting sort of flushed down the toilet.
I mean, that's what happens when the gym teacher is kind of going through some marital issues. You start getting a harsher grader. No, when you're talking about that one person in Panini, my mind went to you remember the movie Office Space, Milton with the red
Yeah, of
stapler.
course.
But that's
Yep.
that's my red stapler. That's
Uh-huh.
my red stapler. But no, I want to talk about the graded players. We're talking about, we keep buying them, and all these recent years, people really do tend to talk about demand for the wax being strong rookie classes, and we have the top 10 most graded by PSA. That's when you and I started talking again. Just about maybe you coming onto the podcast, but before we get to most graded players, I did want to kind of give you some more shine and time to talk about kind of like the universal pop report, because you've worked so hard on these things that are such great value to the hobby, and I would love to kind of have you talk more about that if you'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just, the big thing that I've sort of, or the approach that I've taken is that when I came into the hobby, I felt like data was either misrepresented or not available. And so it
Mm,
was just, there's too much friction. If you truly want to grow this hobby, like, I do think marketing obviously plays a factor in this, but I just think like better data will make the hobby more accessible. People will make
mm,
better decisions. They'll feel more confident making transactions in the hobby. And everything has been presented and sort of not everything, but most things have been presented or sort of um, benefiting the seller. And so you see most eBay listings, are sort of identifying population through one grader, and they're saying top one and all these different things that sort of lead you to believe a different story than is truly sort of playing out in the market. And so, as you sort of get further and further in the hobby, you realize that, and you sort of like recognize there's different eras where different grading companies sort of were more prolific than others, and sort of times have changed. There was even like an HGA period that you might want to look at, or like there was definitely windows where like Beckett was like massive, especially for higher end cards and auto cards and things like that. And like times have definitely changed. But if you wanted to go buy, Connor McDavid card, or if you wanted to buy a Jokic card or something like that, like it's a very different landscape looking at somebody who came into the market in 2015 and 2016 versus what it is today. And so this
mm,
universal pop report is to paint a full picture of a card supply. And, that's supposed to allow you to see, it's already hard enough to navigate most grading companies' pop reports. They're there, but they're not really invested in a way that's supposed to be the most consumer friendly and sort of like easy to use tool. And so, I'm trying to just make those more accessible, but also paint the full picture of supply and bring that not only to a destination. You can come to GemRate.com. That's, the universal pop report will exist, but ultimately we want it
yeah.
to just be where people are collecting, right? And so, when I said at the start of this podcast, most of the last 2 years has sort of been behind the scenes. Most of it was building and connecting and mapping all the different cards in existence, that have been graded.
Mm,
And then part of that is actually building the pipes to get that to other tools. And that's how our business has been built to date, which is we have APIs to help it become integrated into other tools, whether it's auction houses or collection management tool. But I'm not sort of building this business with the idea that people have to visit GemRate in any way, shape, or form for this to be a productive and successful company. I
mm,
do want, though, universal pop reports and universal, grading data to be available broadly throughout the hobby. And so, my vision is when you're on eBay and you're looking at a card, you click a button, whether that's via eBay itself or whether GemRate builds plugins, whether that's a Chrome extension, you
mm,
should be able to see supply right there. If you're actually on a different marketplace, same concept. If you're in a collection management tool, you should be able to see what the supply is for either a card you're looking at or a card that's in your collection. Within that, then there's a lot of other sort of opportunities as it relates to like where could supply go, projecting out supply and different things. But the universal pop report is around this idea that sellers have been benefited by just a lot of the friction as it relates to data in this hobby. And I want to
mhm,
level the playing field so that more people can participate. And this is an opportunity to grow the hobby, like truly grow the hobby, bring more people in, just make people more confident about what they're doing. And so that's sort of the backbone for the universal pop report and why it was built. It was born out of frustration in a lot of ways, but it's been built
mhm.
towards the things that I sort of experienced as a new collector or sort of a re-emerging collector. And that's sort of the basis for why we built it and what we hope it serves.
I absolutely love this. And even though we talked about some of this in the past, I mean, the podcast grows, right? There are more listeners, and they might not go back to those past the 3-part series. I'll make this into 5-part series for you, Ryan. But no, like this idea of like Chrome extensions and the collection management tools, just plugins, make it like there are all sort of extensions out there where I hear ads about them, right? Hey, you want to pay lower for this thing? Here's our coupon tracker thing, or get more bang for your buck by using this extension. So I really I wish you the best of luck with that, because we had not talked about that before. I think that's a really neat idea. So what we don't need from the listeners is for them to go to gemrate.com. Do not go to gemrate.com.
You can.
Actively, oh no, we're actively going out of our way not to go to it, because you said that, so that'll get you to accelerate the project to get the Chrome extensions. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, so gemrate.com is where people should go to get more information about the cards that they have, right? I mean, what is the actual pop
Yeah.
report, not the artificial scarcity of like I've had people say that to me. This is a BGS pop 3. This is a PS, and it's like, okay, well, so what?
Right.
Like,
Right.
but when you're new to the hobby, you're like, oh my gosh, there's only 3 of these in the whole world. Like, wow, I better buy
Right.
this. And it's like, information has power. So I think last time you were here, I did the Papa John's thing. I won't do it now again, but better ingredients, but better data, right? Better
Yep.
decisions.
Yep.
I mean, that leads to happier, uh, in the sense of like, people won't feel as like hoodwinked. They'll feel like, oh, you know what? I know what's going on in the hobby, and I want to stay in the hobby, as opposed to someone being like, oh my god, I got screwed over again by someone. This hobby's full of terrible people. I need to leave, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I mean, there's three, just to sort of like tie it all together, there's three sort of main use cases or sort of ways that you would use the universal pop report, or just like this data in general. But it's like discovery, which is to your point, like I'm getting started. I want to understand, the Cal Ripken market, or I want to understand, the Fernando Tatis Juan Soto market. It's really hard to sort of get that lay of the land, today. And because we capture all sets and all cards, you can see it pretty confidently within GemRate. So people come there a lot of times when they're looking through the lens of a player. They just want to say like, what's the market look like? What are sort of the highest or most frequently graded cards, and sort of what are the more rare or scarce cards in the market? Then people come to us where there's a lot of value sort of ascribed around, like I'm about to make a purchase and I don't want to get hoodwinked, or I don't want to sort of fall prey to the shenanigans of all the listings that are out there. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I actually want to just like confirm what I think is true. And I'll go to GemRate to double check that there's no sort of surprise. Actually, like one of my favorite things with the Universal Pop Report is when there's like a one of one card. You're like, oh, it's actually been graded by all 4 grading companies. Like that's pretty weird, because it's probably not the 10 that it landed in. It's probably something that they just kept circulating it through
Yeah.
the different grading companies till it got the grade you
Wow.
wanted. And so like, if
Wow.
you think about it through the lens of gold, and you think about it through the lens of like one of ones and the blacks out there and things like that, it really will start to open up like this additional level of like context of like, oh, this card's been tossed around like crazy. And
Yeah.
like, just because
Yeah.
it's in that case where it landed doesn't mean that's necessarily like representative of that grade. It's just where they sort of were able to sneak it through, right? And so it's one of the last places to check to make sure you are getting the card that you expected, which I think is really important. And then the sort of third thing that we sort of service more and more in this universal pop report is going to help with this. And honestly, it's probably where people will find the most value initially is, I'm about to send a card off to grading. What do the gem rates look like for all the graders really quickly? And like, you just can see that really in one pretty easy to use interface and be like, okay, this silver prism, grades at 65% here and 40% here. Like naturally, I'm going to sort of, if I think the card is even remotely close to gemming, I'm going to send it to the one with the, the higher gem rate. So there's sort of different ways that we're servicing the hobby, and those are sort of like the key sort of ways today. I mean, there's obviously more ideas beyond that, but that's sort of like the main ways that the universal pop report and pop data in general is sort of helping participants today.
Fantastic. I love it. If that doesn't sell people on the service you provide, I don't know what else. I mean, really, like here you are listening to a free podcast talking about a free service, right? I mean, people don't pay for gemrate.com, right? It's there. It's there.
Yep.
So
No fees, no ads, no nothing right now.
Oh, no sponsored ads. Okay, well, that's something I I messed up on then, I guess, with my podcast. Brought to you by GemRate. Okay, so get to the graded players list. I forget exactly our exchange, but I was surprised. So there's the top 10. We can talk about, and it was mainly like talking about like the three major sports, and then of course, with hockey, like I was like, where did Gretzky fall? Like, oh my gosh, he's not in the top, whatever. So can you? And whether we do it going down the names 1 through 10 or whatever it is, like, can we talk about the most graded players in the grading space?
Yeah, why don't I just read off the top 10 for
Let's
context
do it.
for listeners, and then we can sort of speak to what sort of happened there. But so Jordan is like almost 2 times the next closest player as the number one all time. This is all time, and it's just through the lens of PSA. I
Yes.
think that's a pretty good proxy, obviously, despite all I just said about, hey, let's not talk about a single grader. Like, that's such a limited part of the story. But they do have 80% of the cards outstanding. And so,
Yes. Yes.
this does speak to sort of the over 20 years. This is pretty representative of the market. And so let's just sort of level the playing field with
Sure.
this is through the lens of PSA. Complicates things if we bring in other graders. So
Yeah.
Michael Jordan is number one with 1.3 million cards graded all time. Ken Griffey Jr. is like half of that. And there's LeBron, Kobe, Zion, Ja, Jeter, Otani, which is probably surprising a lot of people if they look at this list for the first time. Then Luca, Trout. That's the top 10, effectively. Brady's right on the outside at 11. Then you actually have like Nolan Ryan, Barry Bonds. But it's a lot of basketball, ultra modern basketball. And then there's definitely once you get past that list, you see like a couple, you see some football players sprinkled in, like Burrow, Herbert, Mahomes. And like it's funny because you see Burrow and Herbert are ahead of Mahomes on that list.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting. It definitely like is overweighted ultra modern basketball, which was like, on fire during the peak of grading and when everybody was sending in base, right? And now that's
Right.
sort of recalibrated. And then you're seeing like baseball starting to sort of pick up momentum again in that. And then football, is there, but it's not as I think that was probably the one that was the most surprising. And to your point earlier
Yep.
too, like hockey, you have to get all the way down to 27 to see Gretzky,
Oof.
right? Who's, which is, and then like beyond that, there's
It's
not
messy,
another
yeah.
hockey player in the top, 50. And this is only a list of
Okay.
50 that I have in front of me. But
No.
anyways, sorry, that was a quick, just like level
Well,
set
how
of
about
this
for my
list.
soccer fans, Messi, Ronaldo? Who's the first soccer player? Is he even in the top 50?
Oh man, is
40
that sad?
something maybe.
Nope, neither of them are on the
Wow.
top 50. You get
Okay.
the last person in the top 50 is actually Tiger, so you do get a
Oh,
golfer who's more
last
rare,
person is Tiger.
which is like way overweighted towards one card. Like I think there's 120,000 Tiger Woods out there, and 75,000 are one card.
And you know how competitive Tiger is. He's probably so seething. He's like he's gonna make another he's gonna go out there and try to win the grading space. So yeah, when I reached out to you, it was really the most surprising thing was I was like, how is Burrow, Herbert, how are they not in the top 10? And we put so much emphasis maybe on social media, hobby, Instagram, and all that stuff. You see these cards, and I go to these shows and I see just the ultra modern quarterbacks. It's all the kids want to collect is ultra modern quarterbacks, and yet they're not in the top 10. Is it more of a testament that the top 10 is just so solid? Like, I mean, yes, I mean, out of this top 10, I know some people got really upset when I said Luka's not a lock for the Hall of Fame, but it's going to be a debate for another time, maybe. But I get why Zion and John are on this list. I'm maybe a little surprised at Trout, right? But then the top five, I mean, Jordan, Griffey, LeBron, Kobe, well, maybe top four, like that's understandably undisputable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
No one would, if you ask people to guess, they would probably get those four.
Right, right.
So so is it so going back to the original question, I guess, is it a testament to those top 10, or is it like more of an indictment on the small market share that football has for the whole sports card collecting world?
It's a good question, and I don't have like a strong answer that I'm like this is why, but I mean it definitely sort of speaks to it's when things were at its peak. 2019
Mhm.
basketball was the focal point, and so
Okay.
like Zion and Ja got sort of a ton of momentum from the grading standpoint. Burrow and Herbert obviously were like considered to be pretty quickly like generational prospects and
Mhm.
potential when they once they sort of came out and actually showed that they could play. But by then it was like not that was pretty quickly followed by the shutdown for PSA in particular. And so while I think a lot of people did send cards in, they definitely like got caught up in the system, and it wasn't like the grade to flip opportunity. Like that, they are two players in particular where I think if I did actually loop in Beckett data and SGC data and CGC data, you'd actually see them sort of not maybe change massive spots, move up a spot or two just from having the other graders factored in here.
Mm.
Because I do think that was when like on the margins, you were getting desperate to send, not desperate, but like you were definitely like much more willing to send cards elsewhere at that time because PSA was shut down. And so I do think they suffered from the idea that, they came to market just a little bit too late. And so
Okay.
even though I do think there's like just if you sort of considered collectability and sort of like the basis for each one of those players, probably not that far off, relatively speaking. But I do think the reason that you see, for the listeners, Zion has 380,000 cards, Ja has 370,000 cards, but Herbert and Burrow are at like 230,000 cards. So there's like 150,000 graded card difference between those two players from a basketball standpoint and those two players from a football standpoint.
Yeah.
And I do think there's that gap closes a decent bit if you bring in the other grading companies for those specific players.
Cool. Well, thank you. I'm glad we did that. I hope people enjoyed us talking about that. We just kind of said a lot of names there, but so just in case, well, you want to see the full list, go to Ryan's, go to GemRate's Instagram, and he has it. I think it was in the last 2 weeks, something like that. Early December, late November, you had the top 10 list, and just dig through the data. I mean, I encourage. I feel like and I'm not just pandering here like that. I really feel like the people who listen to this, I don't talk about card prices going up and down. Like you likened my past podcast style as like the hot ones where I have talks with people. I've kind of deviated away from that, I think, in the sense of like I don't do the chapter episodes as much, but I really like this format where we can just talk about anything at any time. But I do think that my listenership is like I'll put my wrapped top 10 listeners against any other podcast top 10 listeners in the hobby, not in like a cage match, not like physical strength. Like I think that a lot of us are just really weak muscularly, but I from a knowledge standpoint, I would put them up there with any of them. I encourage people to go through to your data and just kind of reach out to you, right? I mean, do you get a lot of people DMing you about the data, like like trolls or supporters and all that? Like, should I encourage people to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get like one or two custom requests a week where people are just like, hey, can you run, I don't see this on the site, or, does this exist on the site? If not, where should I look? And, oftentimes, you could be looking on the site and it just doesn't exist. You can waste 20 minutes where you could just Instagram, DM me, and I could run a query in the background and get data to you in 5 minutes. And so, if you have things that you're thinking about, it's always interesting for me to hear, what people are interested in seeing that may not exist on the website today. Because again, like I said, like the website was something I weighted as it related to where I was focused over the last couple of years. And so it doesn't service nearly sort of the breadth of needs that I can do sort of with the data behind the scenes. And so anyways, yeah, reach out if you have questions. I'm always interested in hearing what people are thinking about.
So wait a minute, you're doing this for free for people?
Yeah, I mean, if people ask, yeah, sure, of course.
You're giving select. Wait, hold on. I don't even know how to ask this, but are you saying us peons can get access to your mind at any time, and like you can run like detailed specific queries for people, and you will just do it just because you? I'm shocked. How have I not done that? And I DM you more than maybe I should. Maybe I'll run a query for my Kevin Durant collection or something.
Well, no, I mean, I love the questions. I mean, that's, I don't have, I mean, look, if you look at my social presence, it's a monthly post, right? And it's daily posts. It's all stats. I'm not really contextualizing much else beyond that. Podcasts are an opportunity for me to, let people see a little bit behind the scenes or hear a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes, right? But, generally speaking, I'm not out there promoting the company that aggressively. And, people don't really know sort of the diverse ways that you can look at the grading data or questions that you can even ask of it, right? And so I like when people ask me those questions, and I don't mind spending, 5, 10, 15 minutes as long as it's a reasonable question. helping shed
Hmm.
some light on stuff. And a lot of times people do turn that into like a social post or something like that, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But you don't have to, right? If
Okay.
you have questions, I'm always curious to know what those are because I'm thinking about ways to build that into what I offer and just make available, to collectors. But also, I'm really interested in what people are thinking about in this space, and so I love the
Yeah.
questions.
That's really nice. Thank you. Despite being a Cleveland Browns fan, you're quite
Mm.
nice. I am for those listening only in the podcast, I'm wearing a really nice and I call it really nice like I'm a Baltimore Orioles hat.
Elitist.
It's the top edition. But I am a DC native. Not oh my gosh, I cannot call myself a DC native. My kids will be DC native kids. But I live in the DC area and I did go to a Ravens game. I love Orioles Park, but I texted or I sent a message to Ryan when the Browns played the Ravens. I remember it was November 12th, and I thought it was Cade York. It was not. You reminded me it was Dustin Hopkins hit a game-winning
Uh-huh.
field goal. They were down by 2 points, and they hit a walk-off game-winning field goal, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the
And
Browns
now,
actually beat yes, and now
and now we have Flacco as our QB. So thank
yeah,
you for the gift of Flacco right now. He's between Hopkins, who is a revelation from a kicking standpoint, and now Flacco, who looks very serviceable from a QB standpoint. We have some
hmm
stability. The team is still, has its flaws, but at least it's a wide open AFC. So it'll be interesting to see if the Browns and Ravens lock up again.
Are you wacko for Flacco?
Honestly, he just looks like composed and can
Yeah,
make throws. So I'll take it. I'm not like,
okay,
I honestly did not like Flacco at all, obviously, for a lot of
yeah,
reasons when he was in the division. And,
yeah,
it's just not interesting to me.
right,
But given we were starting DTR, rookie quarterback that could throw the ball well, and
right.
a bunch of other, second tier quarterbacks, it's nice to at least have somebody serviceable in there.
I can't believe you just said that word again because I heard it the first time you said it, and I was gonna make a Deshaun Watson joke, and I'm like, he just said it again, serviceable. Shout out
Not
Deshaun Watson,
intentional.
not
Not intentional.
intentional.
But man, is he
Um,
a bust? I mean, I
yes,
hope I eat those words, but he is very frustrating. Talk about somebody who gets paid and doesn't care anymore. Like that is quintessential Deshaun Watson right now. I mean,
yeah,
maybe there's
yeah,
more
yeah.
going on behind the scenes, and I don't want to know if that's true. But like, I it was a controversial move to begin with, and boy, is it not playing out well at all.
Man, at some point, the family friendly and the clean title, the clean label for my podcast is gonna have to just come out, just be thrown out, and we'll just get all explicit and crazy. But until then, um, yeah, Deshaun Watson, just what happened. I don't know, but Cleveland Browns, Cleveland's finest. Shout out to Neo, who I've gotten really into his content and watching his YouTube stuff. Just really good. But the two of you, my main Cleveland Brown fans, whenever I come by some cards, I'll send them your way. So
Yes, thank you. I have the ones you sent me right by my side here at the desk. Thank you
that
for those.
that
I appreciate
that
those.
was that was the only way I could get you on the pod a second time was
I
to
can
get
be I
you
can be bought I can be bought with low end parallels of
low.
former
Yes,
former
yes.
Browns. Former
Yes, former
Browns.
Browns, Jamal Lewis. Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
Another Raven to Browns, right? I mean,
Exactly. It's like a subtle jab to be like, here's your, thanks for picking up our scraps. Enjoy
yes.
a Jamal Lewis to 99 from 2012. So thanks for
And
that.
and as you know, Ryan, my entire collection is all low end. I have no really nice cards, just a bunch of just stuff laying around. So I'm glad that I could get it to someone who might mildly appreciate it more than I can. But thank you so much for this appearance. I will try to keep this into one episode. You were just fantastic, and I wish you nothing but the best for 2024 and have you on before 2024 is wrapped in grading and all that. But you, as always, have been full of knowledge. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the questions. Always a pleasure. Congrats on the sponsorship. That's
Yeah,
exciting.
thank you. All right, take care.
All right, Dan.